Excellent. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for lesson 2 of Psychology Semester 2, and that is we're going to be talking about motivation and emotion. Two interesting topics, at least for me. I think you guys will think as well. And we'll go ahead and get started, as we always do, with a spotlight. And this is something called emotional blunting. And I've got a picture there of good old Spock for you Star Trek folk out there. And this is a concept. We're going to be talking about emotions, and we have certainly, all of us have had I'm sure, our fair share of an emotional outburst or two. But there are some people that suffer from several different disorders that lead them to having very little in the way of emotional outbursts or actions. And that's called emotional blunting. Like if you were to blunt a knife and it doesn't cut as well, same kind of thing. Limited amount of emotion showing. It's also known as blunted affect. Affect is just what does it look like externally? What do you look like externally to others? So this particular disorder is characterized by a lack of emotional reactivity. So when there would be some sort of a stimulation that would be, usually for most people, would lead to an emotional outburst, or at least emotional action. So something happens and you're happy, something happens and you're sad, something happens and you're scared. People that suffer with this particular disability don't have any of that, and they have a lack of an appropriate emotional response at all. This can be associated with other disorders, such as schizophrenia, depression, or brain damage. But a very, very interesting concept, and certainly it makes these people difficult to, or it makes it difficult for these people socially to interact with their peers. All right, so we're going to start off by talking about motivation. Motivation is huge. It's really what gets us up in the morning. It's what makes us do anything. It's why you sit down and you do any of your homework. If you do, this is because you've been motivated to do something. And so what is motivation? Well, it's a psychological or a physiological, so something associated with your psyche or something associated with the physical being that you are, a factor that causes us to act in a certain way. That is a motivation. And there are several theories of motivation there, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. Instinct, drive reduction, incentive, and cognitive. And I've just got a little picture here, just a little aside. If you've not seen the movie Office Space, you just have to check it out. It's amazing. And the tagline here is not that I'm not motivated, it's just that I don't care. It's a great movie about office politics. You got to check it out. Anyway, back to motivation. So, of the theories of motivation, the first is instinct. This would be our most base or basic situation, as you can tell from Mr. Caveman there. And it's resolved. The instinct is it's a natural response to a stimuli without involving reason. We don't have to think about it. We put our hand on a hot stove. We take our hand off. That's an instinct. Biological organisms have the instinct to reproduce. They have the instinct to survive. They have the instinct to eat. All these kind of things. And so one theory of why we do what we do, why we're motivated to act, is it's just basic instinct. And some scientists have suggested that there are some human social instincts, things that we do without even having to think about it, like being curious, driven to learn things would be potentially a human instinct. Sympathy for other human beings or other animals would potentially be an instinct. Parental love. You don't have to learn how to love your child as a parent. It's just built in, some scientists would suggest. So one theory of motivation is that, hey, it's all based on instinct. We're just acting as a biological organism, just like an amoeba would. We are just a bigger amoeba acting on instinct. Another theory of motivation is called drive reduction. And drive reduction is based on the concept of needs. So what's a need? Well, a need is a biological or psychological requirement of an organism, something that an organism needs to or requires to exist. So we can think of like food would be one, or potentially self-esteem might be one, things like that. And a drive is a need that motivates an organism towards a goal. So we do something, it's an action that we're doing to try to reach that goal using motivation. And the whole concept here is that we're doing things with the attempt to get back to something called homeostasis. And homeostasis is just kind of our normal state of being. So when everything's good for us, when we are happy, when we are fed, when we are clothed, when we are feeling good, both physically and psychologically, we are at a state called homeostasis. And the theory of drive reduction suggests that everything we do is trying to get us back to this state of life is good. That we either take things away or get things in order to try to reach this homeostasis. Another one would be that incentives are a motivator. And an incentive is an external stimulus that motivates behavior. So it's something that comes from the outside, that's what external means, that makes us act. Okay, so you got the carrot here, the guy is trying to reach to the carrot, so he's going to do something in order to try to get that carrot. That's kind of the concept of an external stimulus. So this concept, or this theory, would suggest that people are motivated to either obtain positive reinforcers. So like, for example, I go to work because I want money. That's a positive reinforcer of the money. Or avoid negative reinforcers. Or I'm going to clean my room because I don't want my mom to ground me. That type of a thing. So it's either a positive or negative, but it's an external thing, and it's an incentive that we're trying to reach our goals through something from outside. And the final theory of motivation is called cognitive. And cognitive, remember, this is our brain. This is us thinking about things. So generally when you see cognitive, we're thinking at a little bit of a higher level. And this one is. It's kind of a mishmash of all these things we've talked about. And it suggests that there's forces that are inside and outside of an organism that help to motivate. There are extrinsic, or that's outside of an organism, motivations. These are things that we do, we act in order to obtain an incentive from without. So if there's something that we want from outside, it's an extrinsic motivator. If there's something that we want to do from inside, then that's intrinsic. That's to satisfy some sort of an internal need. So that we're motivated to do things by one of these two things. Either I want something from outside. The money was a good example we used before. I want my money, so I'm going to go to work. The other one would be that there's an intrinsic thing. Well, I want to do a good job, and it makes me feel good, and I have a good self-concept when I go to work, and people think well of me, so I go to work for some intrinsic motivations too. And most psychologists at this point would say that that's probably accurate. We do things for a variety of reasons. Some are internal, and some are external. And so the cognitive theory is the most popular one at this point. We talked a little bit about needs before. Let's talk about one of the most famous theories in psychology, and that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is named after a psychologist named Abraham Maslow, and he proposed that there is an order to how we need to satisfy things. Okay? So that we have a list, a level of things that we need or that we want, and as we build our way up, we can satisfy those things. And until we've got the basic level taken care of, we can't go to the next level. And I'll show you an example of what this looks like in just a minute. It's essentially kind of a pyramid. You guys have done the food pyramid thing before in health class. This is just more of a psychological pyramid. So Maslow said that there are three basic levels of needs. That the first most important level of needs are what's called fundamental needs. And those are things like air and food and water and safety. And before we have those in place, we can't move on to the next one. The next one is psychological needs. And that's that we need to, as a human being, we need to have a feeling of belonging, feelings of love, feelings of self-esteem. Those are important to us. And if we can have those met, then we can go on to the third and most profound level of needs, and that's self-actualization. And what that says is that's the level where we can think about things like knowledge, things like beauty, and we can do the things that we need to do to reach our maximum potential as a human being. Until we have those first two ready to go, we can't really focus on that last one. And so some people never have an opportunity. If they're worried about getting food and water for their family on a daily basis, and that occupies a majority of their life, they're not thinking about things like art and literature and beauty. They're just not able to do that. If they're in the middle of a war zone, that becomes the most important thing, and they can't get to those other levels where they can think about self-esteem and a feeling of belonging. They're just trying to stay alive. So this is the concept. And here's a visual of what it looks like. So it's a triangle. Basic stuff is on the bottom, the physiological and safety needs, those basic needs or fundamental needs. Then you have your psychological needs, and then your self-fulfillment needs or your self-actualization needs. So that's kind of the concept of how Maslow broke it up. and the activity we're going to do, the case study this week, is going to be based on your interpretation of this particular hierarchy of needs. Let's talk a little bit about emotions. Emotions are feelings that are provoked by objects or events that have high significance. Okay, that's a lot of mumbo jumbo. What does that mean? Well, something that happens to us, and either we see an object or we witness an event, we're involved in an event that promotes some sort of, or provokes some sort of response from us. It makes us happy. It makes us sad. We think it's funny. We get excited. It makes us angry. All those kind of basic emotions are what's going on, and that's a physiological thing that happens to us, to all human beings. That's one of the things that's very common to all of us, regardless of where we are. And there's elements to emotions. There's the physical, the biological response that happens when we have something. So when we get scared, when we see a scary movie or something scares us, some things happen. You know, our adrenaline gland fires off, and it gives us, and we might run away. Those are things that are coded into us to try to get to safety. Those are physical. Behavioral, our outward expression of emotion, our facial expressions, our body language. So again, to say if we're scared, we're going to have a scared look on our face, and we might get into some sort of a defensive posture in terms of our body language. Those are behavioral emotions, element of an emotion. And then cognitive. The last one is cognitive. These are our thoughts or our interpretation of a situation. So if we're scared, after we've had these basic responses, then we're thinking about it. Okay, what is it? Am I truly in danger here? Is this something that I need to worry about? What's my next step? That's what's going on in split seconds when it comes to emotional responses by humans. One of the most interesting of the emotional responses is facial expressions. And you can learn a lot by just looking at people. And we all know that. We know that there's a lot of nonverbal communication that occurs along with body language and facial expressions, and we can read that. And even if a person doesn't say a word, we know exactly what they're thinking, feeling, or otherwise based on how they're carrying themselves. Scientists actually think that this is something that's intrinsic or built into all people. It's innate. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, and they've done studies to prove this, that facial expressions are common to all of us. So what we look like when we're mad is pretty much the exact same thing that a person in a faraway country looks like when they're mad. It doesn't matter what their culture is. It doesn't matter what their background is. It doesn't matter what their language is. We have these built in as human beings, which is pretty fascinating when you think about it, that those are all those are built in biological responses. And as I said, along with body language, facial expressions are one of the most critical of the nonverbal methods of communication. We can learn a lot by just looking at people. All right, so that's a little bit about emotions and motivation. If you would go ahead now and do your reading, then we'll have our case study like we always do, and then finally you're going to work on your assignment. If you have any questions, please give me a holler, and we'll talk to you next time.